Joining me now here on the Knicks Film School pregame show with the Knicks headed to the Twin Cities to wrap up their 5-game road trip. I am honored for a Knicks Film School first because not only do I welcome Chris Hine from the Minneapolis Star Tribune, not only do I thank him for joining me on a late Sunday night after he traveled back from New Orleans, but happy birthday, Chris Hine, who joins me on his birthday.
I can't think of anything else I'd rather be doing right now at this moment than being on the podcast with you, Andrew.
Exactly. The number one thing when you blew out your candles earlier today is I hope I get to talk about the Knicks and the Timberwolves before I go to bed tonight on a podcast.
Correct.
Well,
and here we are. Dream come true.
Exactly. I truly do thank you for making the time for me, and I will make this as quick as possible while I know you want to get back to your birthday. But I do want to talk about this Timberwolves team because while some people may have been optimistic about this season and some people may have wanted to see what the full season's worth of sample size with Towns and Gobert together looked like, man, the start that they've gotten off to, I don't think you could be any better or could have predicted any better or even wanted any better. As somebody who's around the team going into this season, did they have a similar expectation for what we've seen so far?
It's always hard to tell kind of what the internal expectations are for a team. I do think they knew coming into this season that they could be very good to elite defensively, and that could maybe take them far this year. You just kind of look around their roster and the way that they're able to defend. You know, they were number one in defensive rating. The last 2 games they slipped a little bit. They're down to 3 now, but they knew that they had this kind of foundation of defense that they could rely on. And when you have that, you know, you're in pretty much any game, even if you're struggling offensively. So we saw that a little bit earlier in the season and some of these wins where the offense wasn't really clicking for them. Anthony Edwards might have an off night. Karl Anthony Towns took a little while to get going. But while that was happening, they were still winning games because of this strong defense that they had been playing. Rudy Gobert looks great. He looks like, you know, the guy that was winning Defensive Player of the Year trophies a few years ago. Jaden McDaniels has emerged as one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. Anthony Edwards is a very good on-ball defender as well. Mike Conley, even at 36 years old, is still doing it out there. He was chasing around, you know, Klay Thompson the other night in Golden State, and he'll guard, you know, another team's 1 or 2. And then you got Rudy at the rim, and it's a formidable combination. I don't know if they knew that they would go, you know, 9-3 to start, but I think they had high expectations that they could at least exceed what they did last year.
So I promise we didn't plan this, folks. The first 3 players I want to talk about, you just mentioned it: Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, and Mike Conley. We'll take them in order with Gobert, and digging through some of the lineup data on cleaning the glass, it's somewhat misleading because his on-off is in the negative, and it's not what you would think it would be for a team that has Rudy Gobert and has a top 3 defensive rating. And I think what is misleading is, at least from the data scouting perspective, right, where I'm just looking at a website, is that he's like, the defensive rating is still there, but they're a better offensive team when Naz Reid is in the game. But if you could speak to someone who's seen every possession of the Timberwolves this year, you know, what is he adding on the defensive end that when they go into these offensive struggles, that they're still able to keep that baseline?
So I think the biggest thing that he has done this year is get out to the perimeter. And I think that's been so critical for them. He said at the beginning of the season that he was in the best shape that he's been, you know, if ever in his career. Coming into this year. And I think when you watch them play on Monday night, I think you'll probably, if you haven't watched the Timberwolves closely at all this season, you're going to be surprised by how often Rudy is getting out to the perimeter. He's not just parking at the rim and waiting for drivers to come to the rim and just putting his hands up. He is very active. So is Karl Anthony Towns. So is Naz Reid. And that the ability of their big men, Rudy included, to get out, guard the perimeter a little bit, contest shots out there, has been huge. It's really what's been able to take a step up on the defensive end this season. There was a play, one play that kind of encapsulates this in one of their wins against Golden State last week. late in the game, close game. Chris Paul is driving into the lane, and it looks like he's going to try and pull up from about 14 feet the way Chris Paul normally does, that little mid-range jumper that he's famous for. Rudy kind of jumps out at him and tries to contest it, but he also kind of stays back a little bit. And when Chris Paul passes to the corner to Dario Saric, it seems like Dario Saric has an open corner three. Rudy got out there and blocked the shot. And that was like with a minute left in the game. Huge play in that game that enabled them to win. They come down. I think they went ahead on the next possession or something like that, and they won that game in part because Rudy made this phenomenal defensive play that I don't think anybody saw coming. That if you watch Rudy Gobert last season, you would not see that coming because he wasn't 100% healthy, especially at this time of the season. So to me, that has been and he has this rap of like, oh yeah, in the playoffs you can play Rudy off the floor. That whole reputation that he had in Utah. I'll be really interested to see if that actually holds true this season because he's playing phenomenally all over the floor right now.
It's so funny you bring up the playoff narrative about him because so the other night when the Knicks were playing the Hornets, blowing out the Hornets, I should say, I was off that night from production, but obviously I still need to watch. So I had the Knicks on the big screen and then I had the Timberwolves and the Pelicans on the iPad. And I was noticing somewhat similar to what you're referring to, that when McDaniels is guarding Ingram on the wing, that Rudy is the second line of defense, but it's starting at the nail. It's not starting like at the restricted area. He's coming out so much further. So it doesn't just stop the drive, it deters the drive. And that will be something that he would be able to contribute more so in the playoffs. I also argue, like, no disrespect to Donovan Mitchell and to his now teammate Mike Conley, but he has better lines of defense ahead of him in Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards.
100%. And I think that, that's part of the difference too, right? Is Rudy has better defenders in front of him on this Minnesota team than he did in Utah. And that makes a world of difference for how the team is going to guard the perimeter and how they're going to rotate behind Rudy or in and around him. They have this kind of fly around kind of mentality that they adopted before Rudy got here. They used to play kind of a high wall coverage 2 seasons ago with Karl at the 5. When Rudy got here last year, when Rudy was on the floor, they were more drop coverage because that's what Rudy has excelled in, for his career. Now they're trying to find, and it's been working so far, trying to find like a kind of a happy medium of like what they did 2 years ago because they're so athletic and they have all this athleticism with McDaniels, with Edwards, and even with Karl to a certain extent. And mixing that with what Rudy does well. And so they're not playing just like a straight drop coverage. They're very active on the defensive end. It is not just kind of a conservative, let's just funnel everything to Rudy at the rim kind of defense.
So I want to stick with the defense for one more question and loop Karl-Anthony Towns in on this. And while like the defensive rating with him on the floor isn't bad, it's still, especially when he's playing next to Gobert, it's elite, but they're just a better defensive team. Like one of the better teams in the last decade defensively when he's off the floor. Now, another thing I noticed the other night is how good he is offensively when he has it going. Even like some of the connecting passes that he was making where it's not necessarily that he's making shots, but he's recognizing there's a better shot like in the corner. And like he hit a connecting pass to Anthony Edwards for a big 3 in the final minute against the Pelicans on Saturday. And do you think this could work? Do you think from your unbiased perspective for now, or maybe biased perspective for now, like can the Gobert Towns, can that work? Can that combo work long-term in a playoffs? And I guess when I say work, I more necessarily mean like, what does success look like this season? What will it mean? Like, it worked at the end of the season.
I mean, I think winning a playoff series would be a huge step as a franchise here in Minnesota. They haven't won a playoff series in 20 years. So winning a playoff series would be a huge marker of success for this franchise. Now, you could argue that they should be aiming higher because they have, Edwards' max deal coming on the books, Jaden's extension coming on the books next year. So now is the time to really make some hay because you're not in the tax and you have these guys on rookie deals. But I will say that I think can this work long term? Can this work in the playoffs? And my answer is I think so. And the reason why I think so is because I honestly think that Minnesota, out of all the Western Conference teams at this moment, is best suited to go up against Denver in a playoff series. And I think it's because they have Towns and Gobert. And because they can defend Jokic in ways that no other team can. Now, last year in the playoffs, they lost to them in 5 games. They didn't have Naz Reid and they didn't have Jaden McDaniels in that series. They were both injured. I think if the Wolves had a full roster, and they've been saying this all summer, and and Denver has even said, like, some of the guys from Denver last year said Minnesota was our toughest opponent all playoffs. So it's getting kind of old to hear it around here, but they beat Denver already this regular season and they blew them out. And they put Karl on Jokic and they had Rudy just kind of on Gordon, kind of off the ball, kind of in a roamer kind of role. And so what Rudy was able to do in that role, and it eliminates one of Jokic's superpowers, which is his ability to pass and find cutters for layups.
Yep.
If Jokic is passing the ball and these guys are running into Rudy Gobert at the rim, all of a sudden Denver's offense looks a little different. It's not as effective as it is against teams that just have one big guy or just kind of, one guy guarding Jokic and then nobody else to really protect the rim. So they can defend Denver because of this too big formation in a way that other teams can't. And right now, Denver is the team you have to beat in the Western Conference if you're going to go far. So maybe it's a bad matchup for other teams. I don't know. We'll have to see once the playoffs roll around. But when I think about a potential second round series or a Western Conference final series against Denver, if it shakes out that way, I think that they're matched up pretty well to play them. So that's kind of where my thoughts are at this point in the season.
So then the follow-up is like Denver aside, because you're right. Like if they lose a playoff series to Denver, if it's in the second round or whatever, there's no shame in that. You lost to the defending champs in the second round of the playoffs, a place that the Timberwolves haven't been in like 20 years, as you mentioned. What happens if they don't make it to the second round? Is this a bit of a, and this is again coming from an outsider. It's from an outsider perspective in New York, there's the obvious connection between the Knicks and Karl Anthony Towns, whether it be Kentucky or CAA. I'm not even going that direction. I just want to know what in Minnesota do they think is like the end result if this is an admitted failure?
I mean, that's been, on a lot of fans' minds is, with the contract situation coming up here in Minnesota, the second apron looming over every team, change in ownership, and, are they going to want to go into the tax, or how far into the tax are they going to be willing to go? I guess you could say there's a lot of questions just from a numbers, money perspective. And so you start looking and everybody's like, well, Karl's going to be making $50 million. And does this team really need Karl Anthony Towns? That's been the question on a lot of fans' minds. And so, and he would, and coming into this season, the thought was that he could command more in a trade than Rudy Gobert could because he's a little younger, and he seems to have more just general offensive upside and scoring ability, obviously, than Rudy Gobert does. So that is kind of what people, I don't want to say assume is going to be the shoe that drops if this doesn't work. But it's on a lot of people's minds. That's in the fan base.
When you speak to the mindset of the fan base, do they want to keep Karl Anthony Towns, or do they have an attack? Because I'm always curious of that.
What is the fan base relationship to Karl?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting one. Karl has been very loyal to the Minnesota Timberwolves, and every time he's asked about wanting out or this and that, he's always said, my goal is to be here in Minnesota and I want to build a winner here. He's been steadfast in that from day one. The fan base, I think appreciates that. But there is this sense of when they kind of watch him play and they see, sometimes he takes himself out of a game mentally or gets into foul trouble and starts arguing with the officials. There's a little frustration there from a fan perspective for sure. And I think it's at what they've often wondered, at what point is he going to change? At what point does that stuff go away, or does it just become part of who you are as a player? He struggled in the playoff series a little bit. He turned it on as the playoffs went on. But if you're going to be a great player, a maximum contract player, supermax player, it shouldn't take 3 games for you to get into a playoff series. Like, you got to be going right away. That being said, you look at how he has played over the last 5 games here and on this road trip where they just went 4-1, and they do not win some of these games if he's not playing the way that he's playing right now. And I don't know what trade there is out there that you could get a player like him, or the value or what he brings offensively, especially kind of late in some of these games. I don't know what that deal looks like and how that's going to materially help your team, help this specific team at this moment in time. It's still early kind of in this process of him and Gobert. This is like I don't know, they haven't even played 50 games together yet. They barely played half a season together because Karl was hurt for so much of last season. So it's still kind of early. And listen, if they're having success, all the trade talk goes away for now. And I think, with the more success they have, I haven't spoken to the new owners about this. But if you're a successful team and they make a deep playoff run, there's going to be pressure to say, hey, this is working. Let's keep the band together here, no matter what it costs, at least for another year or another 2 years, and see what you got.
No, I get it, and especially from a Knicks perspective, not even like, it's so ironic that you're talking about a power forward that like whose wounds seem to be self-inflicted, that the fan base, like, when he's going good, we love him, but when he's
kind of wears his emotions on his sleeve,
like
good and bad,
when his head's on straight, we like him, but we don't always know if his head's going to be on straight, and
it looks really good, right?
Yeah. Oh boy, do we know that pain.
It sounds very similar.
Oh man, yeah, I can relate to Wolves fans.
That's what was kind of ironic about kind of just monitoring the playoffs last year and just seeing the Knicks fans' reaction to how Julius was playing, and it was like, yeah, this all sounds very similar. I mean, it's New York, so it's amplified more than Minnesota basketball fans.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But when you're here in the market, you hear it, and when you follow the team constantly, that's what is on fans' minds as well.
But I got to be honest, you're kind of confirming something for me, and I watched the Nuggets series, and I'm pretty sure I've seen every Karl-Anthony Towns playoff game to this point.
Yeah,
and I get the same notion that you just like the picture you just painted of how he plays, and it's like a couple games before he gets going, and there'll be one game where it's wow, or even like one play in a bad game where it's wow, but the overall feeling is disappointment that like, oh, we could have got more from him at the end of this series. Like the series against Memphis 2 years ago, there were moments I thought he was going to single-handedly win it for them, and then there were moments where it was very clear he's like hurting them when he's on the floor. And there's a notion in New York that they can upgrade to Karl-Anthony Towns, and I'm like, I think you're gonna be very frustrated in the same way you're frustrated with Julius Randle from time to time, but you're going to have better spacing, So I have no idea if that qualifies as an upgrade, or even if Minnesota would look to just swap one out for the other in that sense, which kind of leads into my next question. Like, do you think maybe the Gobert Karl-Anthony Towns combo isn't the question? Like, are they eventually going to have to decide between Anthony Edwards and who like runs the offense, or is it actually good that they have a second high usage guy that's an elite offensive player next to Ant, who's a superstar on the rise?
I think you need that. I do, and I obviously you saw it the other night. Ant fouled out of that New Orleans game, and they just have Karl to turn to be the guy that takes the last shot. Listen, more elite offensive guys on the floor is just going to make things easier for Anthony Edwards. If just look at what happened last year. Karl gets hurt for half the season, more than half the season. Their offense struggled. I mean, Ant played well. Ant had to play really well at an all-star caliber level for them to just get to the play-in, when Karl wasn't out there on the floor. Defenses were able to load up against him, made it a lot more difficult for him. So I think right now, Ant and Karl being on the floor together is a good mix. And they've generally had pretty good offensive chemistry together during their careers together. They work well off of each other. It's making that all work with Rudy that has been kind of the challenge. Like Rudy is the third part of this. That hasn't always looked great because Ant is still very much getting acclimated to playing with Rudy Gobert, and that's a process in and of itself. But Ant and Karl generally have had pretty good chemistry, going back 2 years ago.
Yeah, looking at Cleaning the Glass now, the lineups where they're together is at 118.8 per 100 possessions, which is it's 79th percentile. It's pretty good. And then when you add Gobert to it is when the defensive uptick happens.
Right. The offense last year went way down.
The offense does go down, but so does the defense. Suddenly you're giving up closer to 100. Yeah. So that's a very clear change, which is obviously the Rudy Gobert impact. I guess where I was going with that question, obviously having Karl Anthony Towns is better than not having Karl Anthony Towns offensively. I guess the thought was more, if you are committing to Gobert long term and you did decide to move Cat, right? Mm-hmm. Could you turn the keys over to Ant and more plug in place? It's less about needing Julius Randle to be back because he's a high usage offensive player. You get Anunoby or just ship Jaden to the 4 and find other ways to fill where Cat's usage would go.
I think one of the answers is on the roster in a scenario like that it's Naz Reid. I think people in Minnesota, some of the prevailing thought is if they have to move on from Cat, they could get 75 to maybe 80% of what Karl gives them with Naz Reid. He's not an all-star caliber, all NBA level player the way Karl is, but he is a very good system fit with the way Chris Finch runs his offense. He plays it basically ideally the way that Naz Reid plays that offensive system. And his defense has really improved over the course of this season so far. So I think there's a little bit of a thought of that. If they were to move on to Karl, you don't necessarily have to bring in another 4. You might have that already in Naz Reid. So it's what does that trade look like? I don't know what that trade looks like. I've thought about it. This is just me speaking. This is not me with sources or anything.
Yeah, you're not reporting.
I'm not reporting.
You're speaking.
This is just me, basketball watcher. I don't think Julius Randle makes a lot of sense here in Minnesota. That Towns for Randle thing. I don't think that makes a lot of sense from Minnesota's perspective, quite frankly. I just don't.
So, listen, I saw the NBA highlights the other night, and I saw someone who's known to be an emotional player put Rudy Gobert in a headlock. It's going to be even crazier when it's someone on his own team if a Julius Randle for Karl Anthony Towns trade were to happen. And look, I'm probably one of the softer Knicks people, Knicks fan people, whatever you want to call what we do here on Julius, because I have a soft spot for what he did during the We Here pandemic shortened season. Mm-hmm. And not a lot of Knicks have made the All-NBA team twice in a span of 3 years. And that's an accomplishment to me. I get his mistakes are loud, but his good is also really good and contributes to winning that this franchise hasn't done a lot of. So I have a soft spot for him while recognizing there probably is a greener pasture there if they could pursue it. Whether it's Karl Anthony Towns or not is, I guess left up for debate. And I think the point you made that winning makes all this go away. I'm not even asking you, should the Knicks and Timberwolves make a trade? I think both teams are winning right now, and it's making a lot of this transaction stuff become a summer conversation, which is what every fan base wants. All the teams that were speculative of like, oh, the Sixers are going to, what happens with Embiid? Oh, they're winning. That all goes away. The same thing for the Timberwolves as well. Which last question is really about Mike Conley and the veteran presence that he has given the Timberwolves over someone like D'Angelo Russell. Have you noticed that there's a clear, like, I don't want to be too disrespectful to D'Lo, but it's like very clear he's better at handing the keys to LeBron.
It's a different fit. It's a different fit.
Yeah.
Like D'Lo's a different type of player than Mike Conley, and it's not being disrespectful, but I think Mike Conley is a better fit for what this roster needs than what D'Angelo Russell was. Mike Conley has been a kind of floor general for them. He's especially helped Ant late in games get into offense, whereas Ant has tended to be ISO, dribble, pull up, dribble. Like just that was late game offense for them. Late game offense doesn't look as much like that anymore for the Timberwolves, and it's because Mike Conley is out there taking control and directing. D'Angelo Russell, that's not kind of the player that he is. With Ant, you need that out there because Ant is still very young and he's still kind of learning how to be consistent in these big moments. And now it's like kind of how it goes. Like if Ant starts to get too dribble heavy, too ISO heavy with 5 minutes, 4 minutes on the clock, Mike Conley comes in and he's taking control of that next possession. He's running some actions. He's calling a play. And Ant has said this multiple times already this year that's a huge difference for him. It's a huge difference for their offense in general. Just having Mike out there to take some of that pressure off of Ant in those situations and helps Ant make better decisions as a result. So that's been a huge thing that Mike Conley has done. And I think Mike Conley is an upgrade defensively, and you don't have to hide Mike Conley on anybody. And so it gives you just a more cohesive defensive unit out there when you have Mike Conley as opposed to D'Angelo Russell as well.
By the way, you mentioned the way the Timberwolves operate when Naz Reid is in for Towns. I want to emphasize small sample size when I say this. Yeah. But in 156 possessions so far this season, it is a plus 30 with a 119.9 offensive rating, which would be second in the NBA right now, and an 89.8 defensive rating, which would be like the 04 Pistons. Like it's like that's how good that 5-man unit is, or just when Naz Reid is on the floor and
Naz had Naz has had a couple tough games of late, but Naz had a great start to the season. A really strong opening 6 games for them. So his numbers, I'm not surprised his numbers are great because he looked fantastic in that first half of the season so far. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious how these two teams match up. Obviously, there's Mitchell Robinson, Gobert. One is elite and one is playing at an elite level in Mitch. That he's off to a great start. There's obviously the Kentucky connection. There's the FIBA battles, or not even battles, the FIBA teammates of Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, and Anthony Edwards that are reunited, and RJ Barrett, the guy they lost to, getting to be back on the court. My last question before I let you go, I usually do this where I turn the pod over to my guest to see if they have a thought or a question about the Knicks going into this season or going into this matchup. So the floor is yours, Chris.
That's an interesting one. I guess, one of the players that's always intrigued me, I've always liked Mitchell Robinson's game. How does the fan base generally feel about Emmanuel Quickley?
Oh man, he is one of our own, and
I figured. Yeah.
There is a very strong attachment to IQ, and it kind of boiled over right before the season because the Knicks didn't extend him. And I think he has said he wants to be a starter. And Tibbs, since the moment IQ was drafted, was an advocate for putting him in the rotation, but was very strict about he's the sixth man. and he has not escaped that. RJ Barrett's missed 4 games. Quentin Grimes has missed 2. And all of these games, Immanuel Quickley has come off the bench. So he sees him as the backup point guard that can play in several lineups throughout a game with Jalen Brunson, but he's not going to start the game that way. And I think Quickley sees his value as higher than what the Knicks are willing to offer him and wants to go potentially pursue restricted free agency and see if someone will throw him a bag. There is a toss-up between Knicks fans that love IQ and look at some of his impact metrics and look at some of his deeper analytics that are like, there's a Jalen Brunson, Fred VanVleet bump if you played him at the starting point guard. Not that, and like there's even like a can be better than Jalen Brunson because of what Immanuel Quickley brings you in off-ball defense. I love Immanuel Quickley. I think it's really cool that the Knicks actually nailed one of their mid-20s draft picks. It's been decades since they were doing anything like that, like even having a pick in the first round, let alone nailing a late first round pick. And I hope the Knicks are able to match whatever offer he gets in restricted free agency this offseason, because I think he's a really important part of why they've been so successful the last couple of years. And that's really where I stand on it. I hope that he's a Knick for the rest of the season and then for the future. And I think the majority of Knicks fans feel the exact same way.
It's funny to hear you talk about, the whole 6-man thing where the year that one of the years that Tibbs was coaching the Wolves, the year that they had Jimmy and they went to the playoffs, Tyus Jones was the backup point guard. And you could look at some of the numbers, and like Jeff Teague was the starter. And you could look at some of the numbers and be like, they're better when Tyus Jones plays, but Tyus Jones never started over Jeff Teague unless Teague was hurt. But then once Teague was healthy, right back into the starting role. He just wouldn't budge.
Yeah.
That's Tibbs for you, right?
That is and I think with Jalen Brunson here, it's acceptable. Like, okay, he's not starting because a borderline all-star point guard is here. That is one of the best offensive players in the sport.
Saying like it's like other ways to get him in the starting lineup. Like, other guys are out or like,
The ironic part is last year, before they traded for Josh Hart, before they added Dante DiVincenzo this offseason, Quick was next man up. Quick started 20 games last year, and it arguably cost him the 6th man of the year because no one was arguing that he didn't have a better season than Marcus Smart. They argued that he started 20 games.
They started too much.
He's too many minutes in the starting rotations. Okay, every single Smart had Malcolm Brogdon. Malcolm Brogdon had a more efficient year, but on a much smaller volume in 20 less games. And Quick was just like a more positive player than Brogdon was. But everyone argued in their voting that Quickley started 20 games. So I don't know if this is a campaign like, hey, you're not starting any games now. That we're taking that argument completely away.
It is.
The example of Jeff Teague that you're talking about, year one here in New York for Tibbs, Elfrid Payton started every game that Elfrid Payton played. And they were awful when Elfrid Payton was on the floor, but they had this elite second unit with rookie Derrick Rose, with Derrick Rose, rookie Immanuel Quickley, rookie Obi Toppin, Taj Gibson. Like, he got the whole band back together from both the Timberwolves and the Bulls. And he just wanted to keep that 5-man bench unit intact and just kept the starters at even, and the starters were like a plus 0.1, and then the bench would just like blitz teams when the second unit came in. And now, which is like the weird thing where the Knicks fans, I think, are kind of confused at what to complain about right now. They have so many good players. Like, they have so many good solutions to problems. Like, RJ Barrett went down and it was like, oh no, what do we do? And Dante DiVincenzo and Immanuel Quickley took the reins. Like, Quentin Grimes sprained his hand and DiVincenzo hit 7 threes. And it's like, so we have every lineup works then. Okay, great. Every lineup works. It's like Josh Hart with the starters kind of doesn't, but Josh Hart's also like does good things in other ways. And when you put him next to DiVincenzo, that lineup actually really works. So I don't know. We're not a fan base that's used to having nothing really to complain about, and so we just like directed it Julius Randle, and that's it.
It's November. Give it time.
Oh, Chris, We find it. We just don't have like good things to complain about. Oh, we have a competent basketball team with good basketball players. What do we do with ourselves?
It's the opposite here in Minnesota. People are beside themselves. They're like, oh my gosh, the Timberwolves might actually be good.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
What's going on?
I'll take it. Yes. Nobody touch anything. This might be good.
Don't do anything different.
Exactly. Yeah. Chris, thank you so much for joining me to preview this game. I am curious how these two teams match up. Knicks are coming to the end of a road trip. The Wolves obviously coming back home at the end of one. So we'll see if some tired legs from travel play a factor in this, but I expect a game in the low 100s between the third and the fifth best defenses in the league.
I'm expecting a rock fight as well.
Yes.
I don't think we're going to see a lot of offense tomorrow night.
So before you get out of here, again, happy birthday on behalf of the entire Knicks Film School audience, and plug what you'd like to plug.
Yeah, just if you're ever interested in the Timberwolves, StarTribune.com is where you can find us. Subscribe to us. Throw local journalism a couple of your dollars if you so choose. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Christopher Hine. You can see my pop music and television takes as well. I'm sure that'll excite people to hit that follow button. In addition to all the basketball stuff I do as well. So yeah.
Last question on behalf of New York.
Yes.
Have you met A-Rod yet?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Yeah. I've interviewed him a few times. Yeah.
Oh, so I don't want to get you in trouble, but what's he like?
I mean, it's very professional. Like the times I've met him, it's been very, journalist kind of source kind of interactions. And so it's been nothing but cordial and professional for sure.
You know, the love-hate relationship I mentioned New York to New York athlete? Mm-hmm. A-Rod personified that, where it was like, you're very clearly one of the best in the sport. We hate you for the very small sample size. Also, you're not Derek Jeter. That's the biggest reason that people hate you. You're not Derek Jeter.
I mean, I personally grew up a Yankees fan, so I am familiar with.
You get it then.
I'm
okay.
familiar with some of that. Yeah.
You just, I'm sorry, birthday boy. You're staying on. I have to ask a question.
I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So I grew up a Yankees fan.
So I have one more follow-up question. What's it like as a guy who grew up a Yankee fan that the team you cover is owned by A-Rod?
It's surreal. It's a little surreal. I'm not gonna lie. I'll say this though, and just to give you a quick little story about being a sports writer. One of the things that happens in sports writing is it's very weird. It takes the fandom out of you because you can't be a fan, right? You have to be objective. You have to cover people in an objective way, and if they do stuff that's bad or whatever, like you have to be able to write about them in an honest, fair, objective way. So it kind of, because of the nature of the job, it takes the fan out of you. So by this point in my life, I don't really root for too many teams anymore because of that. Because I've covered different sports, and each time I do, it kind of just zaps the fandom. Like I went to Notre Dame for college, and I'm not really a huge Notre Dame football fan anymore. I covered them professionally as a journalist in Chicago when I was there. Kind of the same goes for like the NBA. I don't have a favorite NBA team. I will say though, one of the surreal things that happened was when I was an intern, I did get to interview both Joe Torre and Derek Jeter. Kind of during my internship. That was a kind of like a pinch me, wake me up from this dream kind of moment for sure. When I was first starting out, absolutely. I can imagine. Yeah, Howard Beck a couple of years ago, I interviewed him in a similar vein of when did the fandom go away? And he grew up Howard Beck grew up in Northern California, a fan of the 49ers, just like yourself. We were talking before. Chris is a 49ers fan. I'm a Niners fan. He's a Niners fan who with a competent offense. Wish I knew what that was like. And Howard said he got to meet Joe Montana like a decade into his career, and all of the feelings and the euphoria just like disappeared. And it was like one of the moments that it was like, I would have thought meeting Joe Montana would have been a moment, a bigger deal. And I clearly remember it, and it clearly did mean something. But Howard was like,
man, like this would have been so much cooler 10 years ago, but instead it's just,
I feel that
journalist subject,
I feel that. I feel that a lot. Like, that definitely is a thing that happens, and it's hard to explain, but the job just kind of beats it out of you in a way. Like but it's still fun. Like, this job is very fun, and I'm so fortunate I get to do this for a living. And I love that, but that is maybe one of the small little sacrifices that ends up happening to do this job.
A well worth it sacrifice. And I appreciate you sacrificing time on your birthday to come talk about this game. Chris, you're welcome back anytime. Thank you for coming on.
That'd be great. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.